"You're too ugly for him." My cousin sneered across the table, her voice dripping with the kind of pity that felt worse than outright hatred. In that single moment, I realized she hadn't come to celebrate my engagement. She came to humiliate me. My name is Sienna Cole, and if you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or told you weren't enough, then you'll understand what I'm about to share. I grew up in the same small Michigan town where my mother was born and raised. Everyone knew everyone, and nobody forgot anything. Especially not my cousin, Marissa. Marissa and I were born exactly 6 months apart, but you wouldn't have known it by the way she acted. She was the golden child. Slim, blonde, always the first to be picked for anything remotely glamorous. And me? I was the quiet one with a rounder face and thick dark hair I never quite knew how to tame. I learned early on that some people believe beauty is currency, and if you don't have it, you must be broke. I hadn't seen Marissa in almost a year when she walked into my engagement party, wearing a dress that could have paid half my rent. She hugged me perfunctorily, air-kissing both cheeks like she'd seen in movies, and then her eyes slid over to my fiancé, Chris. I could feel her sizing him up, like she couldn't fathom how someone like him would choose someone like me. Chris didn't notice her smirk. He'd always said he loved how I looked in the mornings, no makeup, hair in a messy bun. But Marissa made sure to whisper her opinion when no one else was listening. "He's too handsome for you, Sienna. You know that, right? You're too ordinary." The words stung more because I had fought so hard to believe I was worthy of being loved at all. Growing up, I watched Marissa bask in constant validation while I was the friend in the background, the girl who took the pictures but was never in them. Even in my 20s, I carried that invisible stamp of inferiority, no matter how many times I tried to scrape it off. But that day, her words left a mark that didn't fade. I remember standing there holding my champagne glass, pretending her comment didn't crawl under my skin. But inside, something shifted. A resolve I didn't know I had began to rise. Maybe it was the months of therapy I'd started after my dad passed away, or maybe it was just the exhaustion of constantly apologizing for existing. Whatever it was, I decided right then that I wasn't going to let her define me anymore. The rest of the party was a blur of congratulations and cake, but her voice kept looping in my mind. "You're too ugly for him." Like a curse I had to break. That night, after everyone had left, Chris found me sitting on the edge of our bed, still in my blue dress. He took my hand and looked me in the eyes, really looked, and asked what was wrong. When I finally told him, he didn't hesitate. "Sienna, you are the most beautiful woman I've ever met. But more importantly, you are good. She can't see that because she doesn't have it." I wanted to believe him. I tried to, but something in me knew that it wasn't enough to hear it from someone else. I needed to see it in myself. It was that night I made a promise. I would stop hiding. I would stop shrinking to make other people comfortable. If Marissa thought I was too ordinary to be loved, then I would show her, show everyone, how extraordinary I could be. Not for revenge, not even for validation, but because I was tired of living like a shadow in my own life. I didn't know then that one day, my face would be on the cover of a national magazine, that I'd be the woman she claimed I could never become. All I knew was that I had to start somewhere, and that somewhere was believing my story wasn't over just because she said it was. The weeks after the engagement party were harder than I expected. It wasn't just Marissa's words, it was everything they dredged up. Old memories I thought I'd buried. Like the time in high school when she told a boy I liked that I was nice, but not pretty enough, or the night of senior prom when she laughed as I cried in the bathroom over a cruel prank her friends pulled. I realized I had been carrying all of that for years, pretending it didn't matter. But it did. It mattered because I'd let it seep into how I saw myself, how I moved through the world. Even when Chris proposed, a part of me believed it was some fluke I didn't deserve. But the universe has a way of pushing you to grow, whether you're ready or not, and for me, the push came in the form of an unexpected opportunity. It started when Chris encouraged me to join him at a local charity gala he helped organize every year. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to be around more polished, beautiful people who would look at me like I didn't belong. But Chris insisted, and eventually, I gave in. The night of the gala, I stood in front of my mirror, trying to convince myself that the dark green dress I'd borrowed from my friend Jenna wasn't too tight, that my hair looked okay, that my makeup wasn't too much. My hands shook as I pinned on the delicate silver earrings Chris had given me the Christmas before. When we arrived, I did what I always did: stood back, smiled politely, and tried to be invisible. But that didn't last long. A woman from a local lifestyle magazine was there taking photos of the event for their spring feature. She must have noticed how awkward I looked because she came right up to me and asked if she could take my picture. My first instinct was to refuse, but Chris squeezed my hand and I heard my own voice say, "Sure." I still remember the click of her camera shutter, the flash illuminating my face as I tried not to look terrified. I didn't think much of it at the time, but 2 weeks later, the magazine editor called. She said they'd been looking for real women with real stories for a special issue about confidence and transformation. She asked if I'd be willing to share mine. For a moment, I almost said no. I almost let the fear win. But something in me, maybe that stubborn spark that Marissa always mocked, told me this was my chance to reclaim my narrative. I didn't sleep the night before the interview. I kept picturing Marissa's face if she ever saw me in a magazine. Would she scoff? Would she pretend not to care? Or would she feel that tiny pang of regret she'd never admit to anyone? I wasn't doing it for her, though. Not anymore. I was doing it for the girl I used to be, the one who believed she wasn't enough, the one who thought she had to apologize for taking up space. The morning of the shoot, I sat in the makeup chair, heart thudding in my chest as the stylist brushed powder across my cheeks. I wanted to run, but I didn't. I stayed, and as the photographer adjusted the lights and told me to lift my chin, I thought, maybe this is what freedom feels like. I wish I could say it was easy after that the old insecurities disappeared overnight. But healing isn't linear. Sometimes it feels like progress, and sometimes it feels like you're right back where you started. What changed wasn't that I suddenly felt beautiful. What changed was that I stopped letting other people decide if I was. That day in the studio, for the first time in my life, I looked at my reflection and didn't see someone lacking. I saw a woman with a story worth telling, and that was the beginning of everything that came next. The issue came out in early spring. I remember the morning it hit the stands because Chris came running into the kitchen, waving a copy over his head, his smile so wide it made me laugh. "You look incredible," he said, planting the magazine on the counter like a trophy. I hesitated before I looked. I think part of me was scared that seeing my face in print would make it all feel ridiculous, that it would confirm every ugly thing I'd ever believed about myself. But when I finally turned the glossy cover over, my breath caught in my throat. It was me. Smiling, confident, eyes bright in a way I'd never seen before. The headline read, "More Than Enough. Sienna Cole shares her journey to self-acceptance." My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. There were photos of me in that emerald dress, a close-up of my face, and an interview that felt more honest than anything I'd ever said out loud. It wasn't just about beauty. It was about years of feeling small, about realizing that I'd spent too much of my life waiting for someone else to tell me I mattered. I thought the magazine would come and go, that people would read it, maybe nod along and move on. But something unexpected happened. Within a week, I had dozens of messages in my inbox. Women I'd never met wrote to say they saw themselves in my story, that they, too, had been made to feel unworthy, that my words made them feel a little less alone. I cried reading those messages, not because they were sad, but because I realized how many of us walk around carrying the same invisible wounds. And then there was Marissa. I hadn't heard from her since the engagement party, but I knew she must have seen the magazine. It was everywhere. Grocery stores, salon waiting rooms, the front display at the library. I tried not to think about what she'd say if she called, but a part of me couldn't help imagining the look on her face. Sure enough, one evening as I was sorting through emails, my phone buzzed with a message from her. "Marissa, saw your little article. Congrats, I guess. Not sure why they picked you, but whatever." It stung, even though I'd expected it, even though I'd braced myself for her to find some way to belittle it. But this time, something was different. I didn't feel the need to shrink. I didn't feel the urge to explain myself or seek her approval. Instead, I set my phone down and took a deep breath. I didn't reply, because I finally understood that her opinion had no power over me unless I handed it to her. 2 days later, she tried again. Another message, this time more pointed. Marissa. Honestly, Sienna, you're still just plain. No amount of photoshopping is going to change that. And again, I didn't respond. That silence was louder than any comeback I could have typed. A week after the magazine came out, the editor called to say the issue had broken their online engagement record. She asked if I'd consider being on the cover of their summer edition, a feature on women redefining beauty standards. I hung up the phone and sat there in the quiet, letting the reality of it sink in. I was going to be a cover girl, me, the girl who used to flinch at every mirror, the woman who was told she was too ugly for the man she loved. I thought back to that night at the engagement party, Marissa's smug expression, her condescending tone, and for the first time in my life, I felt light. Because I knew, beyond any doubt, that this moment belonged to me, and nothing she said could ever take it away. When the day came for the cover shoot, I almost backed out. Even after everything, the first article, the messages from women who felt seen, I still felt the old fear curling in my stomach. What if everyone realized it was a mistake, that I wasn't special or brave or beautiful, that I was still the same girl who tried so hard to be invisible? But Chris was the one who took my hand that morning, squeezed it gently, and said, "You don't have to be fearless, Sienna. Just don't let the fear decide." So I went. The studio was bigger this time. White floors, tall windows, racks of clothes in every color. A makeup artist introduced herself with a warm smile and led me to a tall chair near the lights. As she started to work, I tried to focus on my breathing. In, out, each exhale a quiet reminder. You deserve to be here. Halfway through the styling, the photographer came over. She was maybe in her 40s, confident and kind, and she sat down across from me while the hairstylist pinned back a lock of my hair. "You know," she said, "when I read your first piece, I cried. My daughter is 12, and she's already worried she's not pretty enough. I showed her your article. I wanted her to see that worth isn't measured by a mirror." I felt my throat tighten. I hadn't expected this, hadn't realized that sharing my story could ripple out in ways I couldn't even see. And in that moment, the fear eased. Because I understood it wasn't really about me anymore. It was about every girl who'd ever been made to feel small. The shoot itself passed in a blur of flashes and laughter. The stylist picked a bright coral dress I would have never chosen on my own, but it made my skin look alive, my eyes warm. The photographer kept telling me to lift my chin, to let my smile be real. I thought of all the times Marissa had smirked at me from across a table, all the times I'd believed her voice over my own. And when the last photo was taken, I felt something inside me settle, like I'd finally exhaled after holding my breath for 20 years. When the cover was finalized, the editor sent me a proof. I sat cross-legged on the living room rug, staring at it for almost an hour. There I was, not retouched into oblivion, not hidden behind soft focus or clever angles, just me. A few days before the magazine hit newsstands, Marissa called, not a text this time, a real phone call. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hello?" Her voice was tight. "So you're really doing this? You're really going to pretend you're some kind of role model now?" I felt an old familiar pang of shame, but it didn't stick. I realized I'd outgrown it. "I'm not pretending anything," I said calmly. "I'm just telling my story." There was a brittle pause. Then she scoffed. "Whatever. You'll see. This won't last. People will forget you." For a moment, I almost let her words plant themselves in my mind, but then I thought about that photographer's daughter, about the strangers who'd written to say my story mattered, about Chris, who had never once asked me to be anyone but myself, and I knew she was wrong. "Goodbye, Marissa," I said softly and ended the call. I blocked her number that night, not out of spite, but because I needed the space to keep becoming the woman I was finally starting to believe I could be. And when the magazine came out, when I walked by the newsstand and saw my face looking back at me, I didn't feel like an imposter anymore. I felt like someone who had earned her place. The weeks that followed were surreal. I'd never been the center of attention before, not in any way that felt good. In school, I was the girl who blended into the lockers, who avoided eye contact so no one would notice the acne on my chin. At family gatherings, I was the one who fetched napkins and refilled drinks while Marissa held court in the living room. Now, suddenly, people were stopping me in the grocery store. Women squeezed my arm and said they'd read my article twice. One woman cried as she told me her daughter had cut the cover out and taped it to her bedroom mirror. I should have felt overwhelmed. Maybe part of me did. But more than anything, I felt something I'd never known I could. A quiet pride that didn't need anyone else's permission. One afternoon, I was sitting on the back porch, a cup of tea going cold in my hands, when I got a message request on social media. It was from Marissa's best friend, Katrina. "Hi, Sienna. I know this is unexpected, but I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for how we treated you growing up. I didn't realize how much damage it did until I read your story. Congratulations on everything. You deserve it." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to ignore it, bury the past along with the people who made it so painful. But another part of me saw that maybe, in telling my story, I'd forced more than just myself to look in the mirror. I wrote back a simple, "Thank you." Nothing more. I didn't need an apology to heal, but I also didn't have to pretend it hadn't mattered. Chris came out onto the porch, settling beside me with his laptop balanced on one knee. He nudged me gently. "You've been quiet today." "Just thinking," I said, glancing over at him. "About her?" "About all of it," I admitted. "How something as small as a cruel comment can follow you your whole life. And how telling the truth about it can feel like cutting a chain you didn't know you were carrying." He reached over and took my hand, his thumb brushing over my knuckles. "I'm proud of you." I thought back to all the times I'd believed no one ever would be. The next day, the magazine posted my cover photo on their official Instagram page. I told myself I wouldn't read the comments, but of course I did. Some were unkind. A few people still felt entitled to judge my looks, to question why anyone would call me beautiful. But the difference now was, I didn't flinch. Because for every bitter remark, there were 10 more from women who said my face looked like theirs, that my story felt like theirs, that maybe they could be brave too. And then came the moment I hadn't expected, an invitation from a national talk show. They wanted me to share my journey, live on air. I sat with the email for hours, turning it over and over in my mind. Part of me was terrified. What if I stumbled over my words? What if my voice shook and everyone could see how nervous I was? But then I remembered the girl I used to be, the one who had believed Marissa when she said I was too ugly for someone like Chris, the one who hid behind her hair and her silence. And I realized I couldn't say no, because the truth was, I wasn't doing this for validation anymore. I was doing it for every person who needed proof that you don't have to stay small just because someone told you to. The morning of the talk show, my hands shook so badly I could barely hold the mascara wand. Chris drove me to the studio downtown. The sun was just coming up, pale gold spilling across the rooftops. In the passenger seat, I practiced my introduction over and over until the words blurred into nonsense. When we pulled up to the glass building, I thought for sure my legs would give out. But Chris turned off the ignition and looked at me with that same steady calm he'd had since the day we met. "You don't have to be perfect," he said quietly. "You just have to be you." It was such a simple thing, but in that moment, it was everything. Inside, the producer greeted me with a bright smile and a clipboard. She walked me through the order of the show, how long my segment would be, when the cameras would roll. "Just talk to the host," she said. "Pretend no one else is watching." I nodded, even though I wasn't sure I could pretend that convincingly. In the dressing room, I took a long look in the mirror. The makeup artist had given me a soft glow, nothing too dramatic. My hair fell in smooth waves around my shoulders. But it wasn't the reflection that stopped me. It was the look in my own eyes. For the first time, I didn't see fear staring back at me. I saw a woman who had survived every cruel word, every doubt, every moment of smallness. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and walked toward the set. The host was gracious and warm. She took my hand as we sat across from each other, cameras trained on our faces. "Sienna," she began, "you've become something of a phenomenon. Your cover story has inspired millions of women. How does that feel?" I hesitated, searching for the truth. "It feels unreal," I said finally, "but also like something I've been waiting for my whole life. Not the attention, but the freedom to just be honest about how hard it is to believe you're enough." She nodded, her expression softening. "Tell me about the moment you decided you wouldn't let anyone define you anymore." I swallowed, the memory as vivid as if it had just happened. "It was at my engagement party," I said, my voice steady. "My cousin told me I was too ugly for the man I loved, and for a second I believed her. But then I realized I'd spent too many years letting other people's opinions be louder than my own. That night, I promised myself I'd stop apologizing for existing." The host leaned forward, her eyes kind. "And you kept that promise." Nodded. "I'm still keeping it." When the segment ended, the audience applauded. I stood, heart racing, and the host gave me a quick hug before I walked backstage. My phone was already buzzing. Messages from friends, from strangers, from women who'd watched and seen themselves in my story. But the one message that stood out came from an unknown number. I opened it expecting another stranger's kind words. Instead, it was Marissa. "Saw you on TV. You always did love attention, but you'll never be as pretty as you think you are." I read it twice, and to my surprise, I didn't feel angry. I felt sad, because it was so clear she was stuck in the same place I'd finally escaped. Without hesitation, I blocked her number again. This time, I didn't feel guilt. I felt relief, because I knew that some people will never see you clearly, no matter how much you grow, and that doesn't mean you have to stay small with them. A week after the talk show, I got home to find a thick envelope waiting on the porch. It was from the magazine. Inside was a framed print of the cover, wrapped in crisp tissue paper. Underneath it, a note in the editor's looping handwriting. "Thank you for reminding us all that beauty isn't about perfection. It's about courage." I held it in my hands for a long time. I thought about how, just a year earlier, I would have hidden it away, afraid of looking vain, afraid of what people like Marissa would whisper behind my back. But this time, I walked straight into the living room and set it on the mantel. Chris came in a few minutes later, took one look, and grinned. "About time you took your place," he said. And maybe that's what it was all about. Taking my place. Not waiting for permission. Not making myself smaller to keep other people comfortable. A few days later, I was invited to speak at a women's conference in Chicago. The thought of standing on a stage in front of hundreds of strangers made my stomach churn, but I didn't hesitate. I said yes. On the day of the conference, I stood backstage, clutching my notes, listening to the applause as the speaker before me finished. When they called my name, I stepped into the light. The auditorium was bigger than any room I'd ever spoken in. But when I looked out into the rows of expectant faces, I realized something. I wasn't afraid anymore. I shared everything. The girl who used to think she was unlovable, the woman who spent too long believing cruel words, the moment I finally decided to stop hiding. And when I finished, the entire room stood up. They clapped, and for a moment I felt like time stopped. It wasn't the applause that mattered. It was the knowledge that somewhere in that audience, there was another woman who'd been told she wasn't enough. And maybe, just maybe, she'd walk away believing she was. Afterward, as people filtered out into the lobby, a young woman approached me. She looked about 20, her eyes red like she'd been crying. "Can I hug you?" she asked. I nodded, and she wrapped her arms around me so tight it made my throat ache. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for saying it out loud." When I finally left the conference hall, I turned on my phone and saw a flurry of notifications. Photos, tags, messages. One caught my eye, a video someone had taken during my talk. They'd captioned it. "You're too ugly for him," her cousin said. Now she's a cover girl, and she's still blocked. She threw her phone when she saw this. I couldn't help laughing. It was petty, maybe, but it felt like the perfect full circle. I thought of Marissa, still watching from the sidelines, still convinced that if she couldn't love herself, no one else should be allowed to either. And I realized I didn't hate her. I didn't even pity her. I just didn't need her voice in my life anymore. Because my story wasn't about her, it was about me. And for the first time, that was enough.